On 2, we slip smoothly into top gear.
In tonight's Top Gear, what price the joys of the open road? Do today's British sports cars uphold the tradition of motoring for the fun of it? Punctures may be rare these days, but when they occur, they're still inconvenient. We test the latest design intended to get you home safely without changing a wheel. Plus motoring in the 90s, the 1890s that is. What sort of machine was the first British petrol engine car? Good evening and welcome to Top Gear, sadly the last programme in the current series. And we start tonight's programme by harking back to the first item in the first programme, namely all those young, hopeful drivers setting out on a career in motor racing. Chris Goffrey reports from Alton Park and the latest race for the novices competing in Formula First.
We're here at Alton Park for the 6th round of the 20-race Cellnet Formula First Championship. As regular viewers will know, Formula First is a cheap formula for young racing drivers anxious to get into motor racing. There's been a tremendous response to Formula First. There's over 60 cars been built so far, and 39 of them are entered here at Alton Park. That meant they had to put on 2 heats and a final. Our man Chris Goodwin is in heat 1 with the camera still strapped to the car.
I missed the gear. Very hard. Right, well, I've lost a few places now. I'm going to shut up for a bit and concentrate on what I'm doing, I think.
Formula First seems to be becoming a formula for people associated with the racing driver school business. The man leading the championship, Eugene O'Brien, won the first round. He's an instructor at Silverstone. Second place man, Ben Edwards, he's an instructor at Brands Hatch. And lying third and fourth are the Team Turaco cars, and that's Rafael Del Sart and Kelvin Burt. And fifth place man, Chris Goodwin.
That was Ben Edwards gone up. Hopefully I won't do anything like that. Bloody hell! That was really rude. No! Oh dear, oh dear. He's not driving very well at all. I have to get past him as soon as possible.
We always knew that Formula First racing would be close. I don't think anybody anticipated it would be quite so dramatic. Only one race so far has gone the full distance without having to be stopped for crashed cars to be cleared off the track. There's been an awful lot of incidents, and the organisers have in fact taken some people off the grid and told them to go back and learn how to drive.
Probably 2 places. Rather hectic.
Formula First racing is developing a reputation for being fast and furious. What's it actually like fighting away in the middle of that pack? Our man Tiff Liddell took me out at Brands Hatch in an Escort XR3i to show me just how you go about overtaking. Tell me about racecraft. How do you get past somebody like this?
Well, that's often the difficult part. We've got a very experienced driver, Tony Trimmer, ahead of us in number 13, and we can try and get by on the inside, but he's going to brake very late. I think maybe we'll try and dive down the inside here, but of course he straight away comes across and shuts the door on us. So the gap wasn't really there to go through this time. So now you try and get on the inside up to Druid, but again you see
he's come across you again.
Yeah, so you try the old outside, but it's just really not on. I mean, there are moments when you can just be very brave and barge through. Try and make him go down to the right. We'll dummy down to this side, but we'll in fact go up high wide. Now we've got him boxed on the inside, so that now, as we come inside, we've pushed him wide. And we one rule that you put your windscreen wipers on. But there, now he can try the outside, but now we're away.
And again, we're blocking him.
Yeah, it's really a question of teeing people up like that, trying to dummy them to get the inside line.
So you're not only concentrating on driving the car right on the limit, but you've also got to think about how to get past these people.
Yeah, you've got to think ahead, you've got to try and do it for the corner after the next corner, because an experienced driver's just not going to let you dive by on the inside. So this time again we'll chop down the inside, but now we'll sprint back to the outside, so that again we're higher than he is, and we can dive, holding a tight line, down his inside. He tries to shut the door, but this time we've got it.
Watch out for Tiffany Dell at Le Mans in 2 weeks' time. So from the comparative sanity of a tin-top saloon, let's rejoin the open-wheel fury of Formula First.
Now closed up in the sense that Chris Goodwin, with the camera aboard, is right on the tail now of number 71, Graham Fenimore.
Oh, bloody hell. That was close. Sorry about the swearing, but it only just missed me there. I think I'll be a bit careful going past him. He looks a bit wild, as you can see, probably. He's going very sideways. He's going to chop in front of me there.
With 6 laps gone, things were looking good for our cameraman, Chris Goodwin. Enough Formula Firsts had spun or dropped out to guarantee him a place on the final grid. Well, Chris Goodwin, they say motor racing is dangerous. You found out about it, sir, just now.
Certainly did, didn't I?
Well, what happened?
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm not quite sure. I touched another car at the hairpin, and
The world exploded.
look what happened. Yeah, a bit too pleased about it.
How do you feel?
A bit sore, but otherwise okay, and disappointed more than anything.
So, Chris, they say Formula First is an inexpensive formula for people to break into motor racing. How's it proving for you?
Well, the only way I can do it is through getting a few sponsorship deals. I've picked up about 3 deals so far, mainly due to me being on television. That's the only way I can pay for it.
And what happens in an incident like today when you've done some damage?
Well, hopefully my sponsors will stick with me, and hopefully we'll be able to get the car back together.
Because you're not insured.
No, that's a risk you take. 1 or 2 minor shunts and you can get away without insuring. A couple of big crashes and then you're behind.
Rather shocked Chris Goodwin there, and looking at that car, it's going to take an awful lot of time and money to put right. So now on to the final here at Alton Park. And we've been very fortunate to be able to put our camera on Kelvin Burt's car, which finished second in the first heat. On pole position in the final, Eugene O'Brien was looking for his 4th win, but after a spin, he was right at the back of the field. He'd forced his way up to 7th place by the time the black flag was produced, and he had to stop.
As you know, I collided with Raphael at the start and dropped back to last place. It seems I was reported for dangerous driving, and I was given the black flag. I was black flagged for overtaking people.
I thought that was what motor racing was all about.
So did I.
Eugene's spin left Rafael Del Sart right out in front, and he finished an easy winner. Kelvin Burt, with our camera on board, had a very hard fight but managed second place. A clean sweep for Team Turaco. Rafael Del Sart, many congratulations on winning that race. It looked as though you had a fairly easy time up front.
Yeah, it was nice. I mean, I was in a good mood, and we felt it was possible today, really.
A lot of the rounds seem very packed with incidents. What's it like in the middle there?
Really, if you're involved in a pack, as I was, it's very difficult to make a break. But Raf got a break, and it's much easier that way.
So, 6 down, 14 to go in the Cellnet Formula First Championship. We'll be back in the autumn series to keep an eye on just how it's going.
Well, now we've got a follow-up on an item we did a couple of weeks ago on continuously variable transmission, or CVT as it's called. That's the radical new automatic gearbox for small cars that it's claimed takes no more power out of the engine than a manual gearbox, and therefore gives you virtually the same fuel consumption figures. I tested a Fiat Uno with the system in the hills above Turin, and I must say I like the system very much indeed. But I had trouble reversing up a 1 in 4 slope. No problem, said Fiat, because of the altitude, 5,000 feet, the thinner air, you lose about 9 brake horsepower. We wouldn't expect the car to go up that slope. The trouble with that argument was that the manual Uno went up the slope, no problem. So that would at least seem to raise a question mark over whether or not the CVT system does take more power out of the engine. Well, now we've come back from the Alps, we're back in the UK, more or less at sea level. How do the cars perform here? Well, we can't test the automatic Fiat Uno because they've all gone back to Italy. We've got, however, a Fiesta, which has virtually the same automatic system. In fact, they're made by the same company. We've got here a slope accurately surveyed at just about 1 in 3, and again we've got the same problem. With the foot hard down on the floor, the Fiesta can't make it up the slope in reverse. Although the manual Uno, again, has no problem. What about conventional automatic systems? Well, we've got a conventionally automatic Metro, which has, of course, the fuel consumption penalties that brings, that also has no problem getting up this slope. So what does all that add up to? Well, it would seem the CVT system has a great deal to offer for normal motoring, but it does seem certainly it does take more power out of the engine than a manual gearbox, and if you happen to live in very hilly country or have a very steep drive, perhaps this radical new automatic gearbox isn't the system for you. Right, from CVT to tyres. Ever since pneumatic tyres were invented, we've had to carry a 5th one around, of course, in case of punctures. But with the growing competition on space and weight saving, the car manufacturers have been very keen indeed to dump that 5th wheel. A lot of people have had a go at the problem. Nobody's really cracked it. Chris Goff has been to Germany to have a look at one of the latest attempts.
For years, car designers have planned to get rid of this, the spare tyre. Not only does it occupy a lot of space, it weighs a lot. But if you get rid of the spare, what do you do when the driver has a puncture? Answer, make the tyre run flat. Now, we've seen ways the industry has tackled that problem before. Back in the 70s, Dunlop launched De Novo. When punctured, it burst canisters of lubricant, partially re-inflated, and got you home. But it was a commercial disaster. Now there's a new approach to run flat. It's this wheel and tyre system from Continental Tyres. We've come here to their test track in Germany to see just how it works. The conventional tyre sits inside the wheel rim. The new concept, called CTS, takes the bead off the rim and wraps it round the wheel to seal on the inside. What's the advantage? Well, conventional tyres have to make a double flex as they roll along, and that affects the stability of the tread. With the new concept, there's only one direction of flex, and the tread remains completely stable. We set out to make 4 tests on the new tyre using this Mercedes. First, we went on the high-speed oval to look at straight-line stability and the ride over bumps and road joints. Then we moved on to the skid pan to look at adhesion, the point at which the tyre breaks away, and the ease of control. This is the handling circuit with water jets playing on the surface, a lot of standing water. You're looking for how the tyres can break through that surface, grip the road, and prevent the car from breaking away or sliding on these very tight corners. Finally, we looked at the situation every motorist hates, a blowout. When an ordinary tyre is driven flat, the rims rub the sidewalls together from side to side, Friction builds up heat, and in a very short distance the sidewalls fail. The tyre can come off the rim and the driver could lose control. So, for our first test, back out on the banking with new CTS fitted. Certainly the car felt very stable at high speed, bump thump was reduced and ride quality a bit better. Because the rolling resistance of the tyres lower than conventional steel radials, fuel consumption is significantly reduced. Out on the skid pan, it's immediately apparent that the adhesion level of the new CTS system is higher than the conventional tyres we've been on before. I'm now circulating at just under 50 kph and there's no indication of a breakaway. When the breakaway does come, it's much more progressive and much easier to control and much less wild than it was on the standard radial tyres. Out on the very wet handling course again with CTS fitted, and we're looking for the ability of the new tyre to break through the standing water, give us more adhesion and less breakaway on the corners. And certainly on this bend, we've certainly got just that. But what's CTS like deflated? There's now no rubber-to-rubber contact, no heat build-up, and thus no damage to the sidewall. Out on the circuit with CTS and the offside front tyre deflated. We're running at the maximum recommended speed of 50 miles an hour. It's very obvious we've got a flat tyre. There's a harshness and a vibration through the steering that is decidedly un-Mercedes-like, and the degree of understeer is quite powerful. I think that people who experience a puncture in this car and then drive on a flat tyre could be quite disconcerted by the very different handling characteristics. There's very powerful understeer when you turn into a corner, and at first you think the car's not going to respond. But in fact, the tyre stays on the wheel, there's no problems and there's no loss of control. It's just that initial feel that the car is very different. The success of CTS will obviously depend on the degree of support available to the driver through tyre depots all over the world. But Continental aren't about to repeat the mistake of keeping the system to themselves. They're licensing other tyre manufacturers now, and that's obviously the way into volume production. No car manufacturer is going to tie himself to one supplier.
Well, only time will tell, of course, whether this new idea fares any better than its predecessors and does away with the spare wheel. But some cars, like the Morgan here, really wouldn't look right without the spare wheel proudly displayed. The Morgan, of course, recalls the golden age of motoring in the 30s, when there really was a difference between cars built for getting from A to B and those designed for the sheer fun of motoring. Now, to celebrate Britain's potential summer, we thought we'd try and recapture some of that spirit. So Sue, Chris, Frank and myself have been to North Wales in 4 British designed and built sports cars with the tops down despite the chancy weather. So, chasing the Morgan in the powerful Plus 8 version were the Caterham Super 7, successor to Colin Chapman's memorable Lotus, the Panther Callista, now owned by a Korean company, but still a British design, and the Reliant Scimitar, reborn with a Japanese turbocharged engine. So it was forget rushing to the next appointment, forget the shopping, collecting the children from school, leave the traffic congestion behind, and just head for the hills and the open roads.
Motoring, wind in the hair in a car that couldn't be more British. The Morgan seems to have been around forever and it's virtually unchanged, certainly in my lifetime. And that's half the fun of it, the real essence and character of the car. It's very rustic with its cart spring suspension. You feel like you're permanently going over a cattle grid. It's not that comfortable either. It's rather like lying on a shingle beach, but that's half the fun of it, I think. And it really is a very good performer. It'll top more than 120 miles an hour, it'll accelerate from 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, so it's a very quick car. And it's the sort of car which is so characterful that you never feel on your own in it. You always feel like you're driving along with an old chum. Absolutely lovely.
But driving a 7 again is like slipping on an old coat. The memories come flooding back. I remember the Lotus 7 in the days when Colin Chapman's Formula 1 mechanics used to assemble them when they got nothing better to do with the racing team. And then in 1974 it went to Graham Nairn at Caterham, who acquired the rights to build this car, the Caterham 7. Today the 7 has a De Dion rear suspension that's actually quite comfortable. It's got a 1700 Ford engine developing 135 brake horsepower, and that's in a car that weighs just over half a ton. And that's the secret of the 7. It's an incomparable driving experience. You steer it with tiny little movements of your wrists. You dab at the pedals and you flick the tiny gear lever around in the gate. It's the car that was designed for the enthusiast to drive to work all week, and then at the weekends he could race it with a fair chance of success. And that's really what the 7's all about. It's a tamed road racer. There's no concession to anything except sheer fun and enjoyment.
What I like about the Panther is that it's open, it's fast, and in the dry it handles extremely well. As an ex-ragtop owner myself and a confirmed motorcyclist, I love the feeling of having the heavens above you and being able to take in all the sights and sounds and even the smells of the countryside. This car is certainly fast. It's got the 2.8i engine from the Top Capri, and that gives it a lovely fat wodge of torque and acceleration up to 60 in well under 8 seconds. So it's quite a quick motor car. Having said all the good things about the car, what I'm not too happy about is an even longer list. The gearbox has got rather wide ratios. In a sports car, you really need to have something you can flip down and overtake, and you can't do that with this. You have to go down 2 cogs more often than not. And the whole thing is rather hard and uncomfortable. The ride is firm, the seats are flat and biscuity, and at the end of a long journey, you've got really quite a numb posterior. Perhaps if I won the Pulse, though, I might like to have one in the garage just for nice, fine days.
Well, I cut my sports car teeth on an old MGTF and a TR2. Although the Scimitar is a car of the 80s, I believe it lies right in the mainstream of that old British sports car tradition with all its pluses and its minuses. So it's a delightfully neat, uncomplicated 2-seater. The seats themselves are pretty uncomfortable after a couple of hours, and the wind howls like a dervish through the hood over 50 miles an hour. So long journeys at speed can be a real pain. Apart from that, I think the Michelotti design is pretty uninspired. But if it's fun you're after, then there are 2 things about this car that really win your heart. One is the power, because the 1800cc Nissan engine really gives this car an electrifying performance. Puts it, I think, in the Porsche class with 0 to 60 in about 7 seconds, top speed well over 125 miles an hour. Then there's the most beautifully balanced suspension I've driven for a long time. Put the 2 together and you've got a car that's really light and quick and a real delight to put through the bends. In a way, we've had these cars in sort of ideal conditions here, haven't we, with these marvellous winding and well-surfaced roads and these beautiful sunny days. I wonder if open-top motoring is always like that there.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it, really, that it's a sort of form of masochism. It's all right when the weather's nice. It's like getting on a motorcycle. I only ever do it these days when the sun's shining, you can get out in the open. Great. Then it's marvellous. When the weather's bad, it's terrible.
You've got the wrong idea of that sort of motoring. You do it because you like being out in the open air, you like the sunshine. It doesn't matter if it's raining because it goes over the top. You know, that's half the fun of it.
Well, it sometimes goes over the top, but in the case of the Caterham, it comes around the side of the windscreen and sort of straight in the right eye. But I think what it today has proved is that driving without side screens or side windows really is a misery, unless you're prepared to wear goggles or a full-face helmet, I think, especially in the case of the Caterham.
Because of the buffeting?
Indeed.
In a way, that shows up just how sophisticated the modern saloon car is, because we're so used to high comfort levels and low noise levels that we notice it very much more when we are out in the open air.
In a car like this, you're right out there with the countryside. You can hear the lambs bleating in the meadows. It's just a lovely feeling. You can't hear the lambs beating in the Caterham 7. I mean, the roar from that exhaust. But I think the fun factor really goes up with the further you get away from the normal motoring conditions. So we're normally sort of warm and soft and cosseted and quiet. These are loud and noisy and windy and really quite uncomfortable.
Especially in the case of the Caterham, as well as the lambs in the fields, you can actually hear the blue bottles bouncing off your teeth, you know.
But would you buy one of these as a single car, as a first car?
I think it would depend very much on your lifestyle, and I mean, how many dependents you had. Obviously, there's nowhere to put kids or anything else in these things, so they are very selfish cars in that way. These are the only survivors of a generation of cars that have gone, like the Spitfires and the Midgets and the MGBs and the TR6s and the TR5s. They've all gone. These are the only surviving examples, so they're appealing to a much more limited and obviously more affluent market.
But
remember the good old days.
Well, I think the great shame is there used to be cars for young people who were footloose and fancy-free and didn't have kids to worry about putting in the back, and those sort of people can rarely afford them now. They really have become priced beyond their natural market.
They can't afford to insure them because they simply can't get insurance for this. So it is very much, I think, a beautiful car to have in your garage to take out on the right occasion, but not a practical, sensible, everyday motor car.
But a lot of fun. I mean, marvellous fun in this sort of weather, on these sorts of roads, these sorts of surfaces. I mean, today was a real buzz, wasn't it?
Now, it's come to our attention that two local inventor chappies are trying to devise one of those newfangled motor machines. You know, one of those confounded horseless carriages that we've heard about from the continent that go banging and clattering all over the place, polluting the atmosphere and frightening everybody's horses. That'll do, James, thank you. Of course, it's all poppycock. I mean, it'll never catch on. If God had meant us to have motors, he wouldn't have given us these fine beasts here. Let's have a look at the thing.
In fact, those inventor chappies were the Santler brothers, who were bicycle makers here in Malvern. And Dr. Alan Sutton has just established that as early as 1889, that's just 3 years after Carl Benz dog cart rolled in Germany, they designed this four-wheel car. Now, they started with a steam engine. They went on to a coal gas-driven internal combustion engine. But as early as 1894, this very car was tested here in the grounds of Madresfield Court near Malvern with a petrol engine. So it lays claim to being the very first British-built four-wheel petrol-driven car. Now, not being one to miss an opportunity, let us, with the benefit of 93 years hindsight, give it a road test with the help of Alan to start, I think, Alan. Well, what we've got here is a 1 litre, 1-cylinder engine. It's got a 2-to-1 compression ratio with a pot diameter of about 4.5 inches. Alan, how do we start her?
Well, the engine is warm, ignition is retarded, and the belt's disengaged. All we have to do is to turn on the petrol and swing the flywheel.
Right, you're going to do that? These things throw grease everywhere, don't they?
Now, it's belt-driven, so to get this car underway, you grasp the tiller steering very firmly with the right hand, gently engage the belt with the left hand, and as you see, it rolls away very smartly indeed. Don't worry about acceleration, because there isn't any. Don't worry about the throttle, because it has no effect. Just worry about the spark advance, because that controls the engine. When you reach a cruising speed of about 5 miles an hour, you can hear the engine revs pick up again. The conventional cart springs are perfectly adequate at that speed, so too are the brakes. Single drum brake on the rear wheel, plus the emergency hand brake. No reverse, of course, so if you want to turn around, it's a question of getting out and pushing. Consumption, about 20 miles to the gallon, not bad for the time. The big problem was really water, because it did only about 2 miles to the gallon, so you had to stop every 20 miles or so in order to refill. If you'd like to switch off, Alan. So altogether a very sophisticated car for the period.
The Santler's 1 litre, 1-cylinder engine develops 3 horsepower, top speed is around 10 miles per hour, fuel consumption about 20 miles to the gallon, current value around £100,000.
Well, if this really was the first four-wheel petrol-driven car, then it stands a reasonable chance of being the car of that decade, the 1890s. But what you might think are the most notable cars of the 8 decades of this century? The Mercedes perhaps for the first one, the Model T for the second, certainly the Minis for the 60s. Now, if you have any ideas on that, please write to us, because we'd like to road test, as we have this one, the most notable entries. I'll give you the address in a minute. Now, in addition to that, do you think you're a typical motoring family? Because we need families to help us road test new cars. So we'd like you to write to us if you wish to volunteer. Now, the address for both those things is Top Gear, BBC Pebble Mill, Birmingham B57QQ, marking your letters in each case either test driver or car of the decade. And that's really all for this series, I'm afraid to say. Next series, we're back from the Frankfurt Motor Show We go to Motor Fair as well, and then of course we have our reports on the Lombard RAC Rally, as well as items on your car complaints, on rural road safety, and perhaps on the cars of the decade. So until the autumn, have a good summer, drive safely, good night.